Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and we're going to take a look at a very nice game played at the recently completed European Individual Chess Championships. So they finished, I think, at the very end of March, and there are a lot of great games there. I present quite a few of them on my blog if you want to check that out. It's thechessmind.net, and I give this game there too, but without annotations. So this is especially for you guys. You get to see it with some notes. Now, some of the notes that I'm using here are based on Anish Giri's in the Chess Vibes, what is it, Chess Vibes training, so in that little weekly newsletter. But I add quite a bit, so it's not just what he gives. I don't give all of his lines either, but some of his lines are very nice, and I include them. Anyway, this is a game played between Avital Boruchovsky, not a very high-rated player, 23-33. So, certainly a very good player, and he's a young guy too. He's 15 years old, 14 or 15-year-old Israeli player. So obviously an up-and-comer. Black is a strong grandmaster, Boruchovsky-Savchenko of Russia. And but despite the big rating difference, you'll see Boruchovsky plays some spectacular chess and wins just really a magnificent game. So this was played in the last round, I believe, and here we go. So Boruchovsky had white, and they go into the Ilyakin, and here Savchenko plays this highly provocative move, knight to d7, the Larsen variation. And if any of you guys have read Tal's autobiography, his chess autobiography, The Life and Games of Mikhail Tal, which is a great book, I recommend it wholeheartedly, one of the best chess books ever written. Larsen bravely played this against Tal in their candidates match in '65. And Tal thought and thought and thought. I mean, he was considering knight takes f7, which is, the principal try. This is the way to attempt to bust this variation, just to bring Black's king out in the center and attack and attack. And this is the kind of thing that you'd expect Tal to play, but nevertheless, he knew, of course, that Larsen would have examined this carefully, and he kept thinking and kept thinking, and I think he considered this for something like an hour. I mean, he really spent a long time deciding on this before finally chickening out. I think he said something like, after finally finding something that resembled a defense for Black, he did something else. And he said this was a psychological mistake, that he should have either decided immediately to reject, or to not go into the sacrifice, or else to play it fairly quickly after seeing that there was no clear refutation, and just trusting that it would be all right for White. And indeed, well, in the game he chickened out, as I think I mentioned, maybe not, but he gave up on it. He played, I think, either bishop c4 or knight f3, I can't remember which, and in part because he was kind of disturbed by his decision making, he didn't play as well and lost the game. Fortunately for him, he went on to win the match by playing a very brave sacrifice in a different situation in the last game of the match, and won in really good style. But anyway, the same dilemma faces players today. Knight to f3 is safe, and it's probably objectively the best move, but it's hard to reject a move like knight takes f7. And in our game, Boruchovsky did not reject it. He went for it, and well, his bravery was rewarded. Also, I'm sure his prep. I mean, I think, found some nice new ideas here. So the key to this whole thing goes like this. And the king has to come to e6, otherwise White is just taking the knight back and is up a pawn with a better position. So king e6 is crucial. Now, here White has 3 tries. One very promising approach, not quite as popular as what happens in the game, but also important, is g3. The bishop can come to g2 or to h3, and this is dangerous for Black too. Queen to g4 is often played to just call it a day very quickly. King f7, queen h5, and you just go back and forth. It might be worth throwing that in once. Queen g4, king f7, queen h5, and then varying from here and playing c4 or g3. The reason why is twofold. So first of all, if you're playing this variation, it's quite likely that you're going to get into time trouble calculating at some point. I mean, even if your preparation is really good, you're still going to have to figure things out at some moment. So it's worth probably getting the extra time on the clock. Whether you're playing within increments, you get the 2 free 30-second increments, or if you're playing regular time control chess, you're at least 2 moves closer to the time control there. Anyway, it's also worth playing in the hopes that black will goof up and play king to d6. Now, Larsen tried this. I don't think he was goofing up. He was being provocative. He tried this in an offhand game against Bobby Fischer back in 1966, and he got massacred. So here's what happened in that game. So Fischer played c4, of course, and now the only try really to keep this knight is to play the knight back to f6, and this is what he did. But Fischer just, or I'm sorry, the other knight. Sorry about that. This knight going back to f6, but white, I think, wins here. c5 check. Now, if the king goes anywhere, it's mate. King c6, queen e6 is mate. If the king goes to d5, it's mate too. The knight checks first, pushes the king back, and then, again, queen to e6 is mate. So you've got to play knight takes c5, but this is, it's not any surprise at all that white is going to just massacre black here. So here's a sample variation. Okay, knight c3, and now we threaten to take on d5 anyway, and then take on d5 again, and then take on d8. So c6, now check here. King e7, we take this, bishop c5 check. Okay, if you go here, this is a very nice checkmate. So king e8, bishop to b5, and now rook takes d5. And if e takes d5, rook e1 check, and black is just losing tons of material. He can basically already quit at this point. So that's what happens if black tries to keep the piece here. Larsen against Fischer tried this move, but this didn't help much. Material is even, and now black is a pawn ahead, but with black's king sitting on e6, it's no surprise that Fischer obliterated him. So bishop to e3, and black doesn't want to allow bishop to c4, so he tried queen to b4, but this is not going to work. a3, queen b2, bishop to c4 check. And I don't know, I'm not sure what Larsen was thinking. Maybe he hoped to play king f5, but then queen to g5 is mate. So he's got to go to d7, but now white saves the rook with tempo, and that means that he can save the knight. And worst of all, it's going to b5, and there's no satisfactory answer to the threat of knight takes c7, which, by the way, happens to be a mate threat. So Larsen gave up here. And this is, I think, a pretty convincing argument against king to d6. This is just not to be played. All right, so anyway, that's queen g4, king f7, or queen g4 check. So king d6 loses, king f7 invites a repetition, and then white can decide the second time. So the main move is c4, and this is what was played. Knight 5 to f6, d5 check, king d6 is the only sensible move, queen to f7. All right, knight e5, bishop f4, c5, hoping at some point to bring the king back to c7, and also stopping white from playing c5 check. Knight to c5, c3, pardon me, threatens knight to b5 checkmate. So a6 is the best move here, and this is all well known. It's been standard theory in this variation for a long time. Okay, it's a ridiculous variation, but if you play it, you'll know how to get to this position, and it'll look familiar to you. All right, well now white has played a few things here. He's castled queenside sometimes, but the main move is to play b4. And this is no bed of roses for black either, though he might be okay. From here, the best move is probably queen to b6. White plays rook c1, and who knows? You know, analyze this, enjoy it, have fun. I would recommend analyzing it on your own without the computer first, and then bringing the computer into it, and you're bound to find many very attractive variations. I'll just point out that if c takes b4 instead, this was played in some game where it was a quick draw, but in fact white can, I think, maybe not win, but enjoy a big advantage with c5 check. So king takes c5, knight a4 check, king d6, knight b2. The threat is knight to c4 check, which will regain the piece. So b5 is probably the best try. Knight to d3 regains the piece anyway, since if knight f to d7, there's going to be queen e6 check, and then taking anyway. Or maybe rook to c1 is even better. So king c7 is best, getting the king out of there. And here, okay, black is just up a pawn, but white can take on b4 or can play for continued initiative. Obviously the black king is still not brilliantly placed here. So bishop f5, knight takes b4, queen e8, takes, a4, and the initiative just continues. I mean, black just never gets to safety. So here, for example, white is clearly better. You can see black's coordination is rather poor. He lags in development. His king is still exposed, so white has a serious advantage here. So that's, again, why after b4, black should probably play queen to b6. And, again, just analyze this on your own, and you'll find lots of good things. Well, in our game, Boruchovsky played bishop to d3, which is rarer, but it's also known. It's been played too. And here, perhaps, Savchenko already makes the losing move. And it's a little bit surprising that he did, because while he may have been surprised by bishop to d3, I can't say that he was surprised by anything up to that, because if he's playing knight to d7, he's got to know this position here. I mean, this is just standard stuff. So bishop to d3 is a little bit unusual, but not tremendously so. And at any rate, the move here for black, the move that he has to play, is g5. So this is a standard idea, gaining a tempo for the defense. White can't take because the queen hangs, so bishop to g3. He could take on e5 also, that's another try, but bishop g3 is probably the more dangerous move. Bishop h6. Okay, and now I'll show you a couple of variations. If white castles, hoping to play either f4 at some point or just put a rook on the e file, then rook f8, trapping the queen. And now, a couple of very interesting possibilities. The nicest one is this, or the most amusing variation. And this is not Gary, this is my stuff here. Knight e4 check. And if knight takes e4, white plays queen h7. But black plays king c7, so a spectacular move. Bishop e5 check, king b6, and now white is clearly worse. Although it's not fatal, not quite fatal. He can play knight takes g5 here, and if rook takes f7, knight f7, and there's quite a bit of play. He'll have a rook and two pawns, and still some very active pieces in exchange for the queen. But still, black is certainly better here. So bishop takes e5 check is the alternative. King e5, rook a to e1, king d6, and now knight e4 check. And so this allows white to excavate the queen, or to extract the queen, I should say. Knight takes e4, queen h7. So black is up two pieces for two pawns, but white is getting a piece back. Rook f6, queen e4, king c7. So the other side of the coin is that black's king is now safe. And this is kind of an interesting position. I mean, white's got three pawns for the piece, and his pieces are all active, but the problem for white is that his pawns really aren't functioning very well. I mean, they're a non-factor. I mean, if you put that pawn on g4 over on d6, well then he's got three connected passers. Although even there, I mean, black seems to be pretty well set up to meet them. But right now, white has only one passed pawn, the pawn on d5, and that's clearly not going anywhere for a long, long time. So black, I think, has the better of the play here. So let's go back to this position. So we had this from the game, then I was suggesting g5, bishop g3, bishop h6. And now instead of castling, so castling is probably a mistake, I guess. So better is knight to e4 check. Takes, and I think white has sufficient compensation here, but probably not more after either queen f8 and then bishop g7 or g4. So in both cases, it's roughly balanced, I suppose, but black is all right. Certainly not losing. Well, in the game, instead of g5, Savchenko played g6, and he might just be lost already at this point. Now, this position has occurred before, and black was okay in the earlier games, but it looks like, thanks to the wonder that is the contemporary computer, we can maybe prove that white is winning by force. All right, so here black played queen to c7, and this was a new move. b6 has been played before, but this seems to lose. So b takes c5, b takes c5, and now Geary, and of course engines in general, will find rook to b1 if they're strong enough. Now, at first I thought that instead of the moves that Geary looked at, that maybe rook to a7 would hold. But there's a fantastic refutation of this. So he doesn't give rook a7, but there's a nice refutation. Now, the obvious move here is to castle kingside with the idea of playing rook f to e1. But after bishop h6, nice move here, bishop takes e5 check, king takes e5, rook f to e1 check. Black does not retreat the king, but plays king to d4, just forking the white pieces, and it looks like there's probably nothing better than a perpetual check. It's hard to believe. I mean, white's only down one piece for a pawn, but the problem is his queen can't come back into the action, and the bishop on h6 is covering the c file, for instance, and black may be ready to play rook to b7 or queen a5, and again, he's forking the two pieces with his king. So it looks as if white probably has nothing better than a perpetual check here. However, back here after rook to a7, white can play instead king to d1. The idea, or the first idea, is the same as castling. You're enabling rook to e1. But the second point is different. So after bishop h6, takes, rook e1 check, king to d4, there's king to c2. Now both pieces are protected thanks to the king's help, and now black's king is going to die. So for instance, on queen to e8, white plays another very spectacular move, rook to e6. And the point of this is that if you play knight e2 check here, black's king can go back to e5. So we just cut off the exit. If bishop takes e6, queen e6, same deal. And finally, if queen f7, knight e2 is checkmate. So very, very nice. Note, by the way, that if the king goes back to d6, then white wins more prosaically with rook to e6 check. And then you could play d6. This is fancy and perhaps the best move, but rook f6 is fine, taking advantage of the pin. And now white has a material advantage, in addition to obviously an overwhelming positional advantage. All right, so that is what happens on rook to a7. All right, the moves that Geary looks at are bishop to h6 and queen a5, I think. So on bishop to h6, rook to b7 is very nice. If black takes the rook, then queen e6 and bishop e5 wins the queen, and just about everything else too. If you play bishop takes f4, there's a spectacular refutation of this one as well. White's queen is trapped, that's true, but queen takes f6 check, e takes f6, knight e4 reveals that something even more significant is trapped, black's checkmated king. But the best move here is bishop to d7, and now after bishop to g3, maybe black is not losing right away. So certainly white is in control, but accurate play is required, and maybe I'm not 100% positive that there's a mathematically forced win, but perhaps there is. So takes, castles, queen f8, and once again, rook to e1. All right, queen takes f7, bishop e5 is mate, good times there. And if knight f to g4, then this is a key move here, queen f3. So this retreat, I think, gives white a big advantage. Maybe it'll be a winning one soon, but certainly a big advantage. The point is that after queen takes f3, g takes f3 hits the knight. If the knight moves, then e5 drops, and in fact, it's checkmate. And if black doesn't take white's queen, then white just moves his queen out of the way, and the attack rages on. So black is in big trouble here, but perhaps not losing by force. So that was bishop h6. The other move here is queen a5, and then Geary just gives takes, and king to d2, and stops here. So it's worth looking a little bit more, since it seems that black's king can run to safety, but it's not quite so simple. So one sample variation is knight e8, rook e6 check. Of course, you don't want to take the knight because of bishop to h6 check, and then rook takes the queen on e8. So rook e6 check. Now, if black takes, then we take, and we play queen c6 check, and then queen a8 check, and it's a bunch of checks, probably on the way to a mate. So king c7, but now d6 check, knight takes, rook takes d6, queen d5, and this time we don't take that rook, but we'll take the other rook. And material is even, believe it or not, after all of that. All of those little sacrifices, and material is even, but clearly the position isn't. Black's king is still a bit too exposed, and white should win this. All right, so that was all I wanted to say about 14b6. Another move that hasn't been tried is queen to b6. It looks logical at first, but if white just continues with business as usual, black's position will collapse soon enough. And just to give one variation, castles, again aiming to play rook f to e1, and just getting the king to safety. Okay, queen takes b4, and we just take time out, defend this knight first. And now rook f to e1, and we intend to play h3, So let's say black tries g5. Again, bishop g3, h3 is coming. Another idea is to play rook takes e5, knight e5, and then knight to e4 check, followed by bishop takes e5 check. And black is just busted here. So queen b6 doesn't really help. All right, well, in the game, Savchenko played queen to c7. And now, probably, white could have won much less dramatically with castling, followed by ganging up on the knight on e5. So, for instance, king to d7, queen e6 check, and then we take on e5. All right, white's up a pawn, and that'll be more than enough to win unless black takes. So black should take, but now knight a4, and white threatens knight to b6, followed by bishop to b8, winning the rook. So rook to g8 is best here, so that way he has knight to d7 in this position. And this keeps black alive, but still, white could take the rook in the corner or play to keep control with something like this, following it up with rook f to b1, and in case of a5 in response, then a3, and white's pieces are all extremely active. The pawns on c5 and d5 are very good. White's bishops are incredibly powerful, and black is probably lost here. Well, not probably, I would say he is lost. So that would be castles. But b takes c5 is good enough too, and it keeps the game more fun. All right, well, at this point, black should take, but which way? Well, if queen c5, then we take, we castle. All right, and now, for instance, if queen to d4, which threatens both pieces and also creates a possible flight square for the black king on c5 in some cases, well, white wins like this. Rook f to e1 check, king d6, c5 check. All right, if king takes c5, then d6. So more line clearance, and it just doesn't matter. So black is up a piece. He can take his choice of two more pieces, but with the king on c5, it's not surprising that something bad's going to happen to him. And I'll give a couple of variations. If bishop takes h6, covering c1, then rook takes e7. And now there may be a check from c7 coming, or in some cases even rook takes b7. It also stops queen takes c3 because rook c7 check is a skewer. All right, king takes d6 is probably the most resilient try, but now rook a to e1. Again, just calmly disregarding the fact that two pieces are en prise. All right, black's best now is knight to d7, hoping to get back to c7 and run his king away. Well, the answer to this one is another spectacular move, bishop to b5. 2 points to this. One is the threat to take on d7. The other is to play rook to d1, skewering the queen and the king. And really, black has nothing better than just to protect the knight on d7, allow the skewer, and then take here. And right now, black is doing well materially. He's got a rook and two bishops for just the queen. But no development and a bad king is going to lead to bad things. Here, if king to c6, then rook to e6 is mate. So he's got to try king to b6, but now queen d6 check, and then knight to c3. And white has a mating attack brewing. There's no way for black to avoid the mate without losing the house. And maybe even then, he can't do it. All right, so bishop to h6 in this position doesn't hold. All right, let's try something greedy. Queen takes c3. Well, we cash in. Takes, king d6. And again, black has a significant material advantage here. He's got a rook, bishop, knight, and pawn for a queen. That's a lot. That's an extra piece, in effect. But, again, his pieces are undeveloped, and his king is, out there asking for trouble. So all the money in the world doesn't help you if you don't use it, and same thing with your material. You can have all the stuff, but if everybody's sitting at home, it doesn't help. Queen to b3. This is the key move. And, kind of reloading here. Queen b6 is one clear point. A funny idea is that if black plays e5 to retreat the king to e7, then white does a little switchback here, prevents the black king from retreating, and white's winning here with threats like queen f6 and queen c7 check. So e6 is probably the best, and now bishop c4, king e7, and we just take. All right, rook c7 is the threat here, or one of the threats, also just taking on c8. And if bishop e6, then we take this guy, take the rook, take the pawn, And now, after all of that, it's white who's up material. So white has a queen and 2 pawns for 3 minor pieces and should win the game. Okay, well, speaking of the game, let's get back to it here. Instead of queen c5, Savchenko tried king takes c5. All right, knight a4 check, driving the king up. If black tries to retreat, then c5, and again, white just cashes in. And this one is even simpler, I think. Material is even, but black's king can't castle. He's already been up and around, and he's got, again, very poor development. White is just going to finish his development with the rooks, and black's position will collapse quickly. Also, knight to e4 is a devastating threat as well. All right, so back to the game. Savchenko had no choice but to bravely go up and bring his king to d4. And now Boruchovsky makes a really fantastic move. He castles queenside. Now, it's an obvious move in one sense, but still, I mean, his king is a bit exposed there, and the reason why it's a really great move is because black has this trick, bishop to h6. And now if you take the bishop, well, your queen's hanging. So what does white do here? Well, he takes it. He plays bishop h6. And incredibly, if knight takes f7, white just plays rook h to e1, and the king dies. Okay, the threat is bishop to f1 mate, kind of sneaky there. And the funniest line, this is a line of Geary's, is queen c4, bishop c2 check. And this wins the queen and more. So he stops here. I'll just show you the forced mate that results. So queen d3, rook takes, king c4, rook c3. All right, if the king goes to the left, to his right, then a3 check, rook c5 check, and bishop to d2 is checkmate. It's great how white has to use all of his pieces, and does use all of the pieces for the mating attack. If king to d4 instead, then bishop to f4, again cuts off the king's retreat, so rook to d1 mate is the threat. And on king takes d5, then knight to b6 check, king to d4, and rook to c4 mate. Really great stuff here. So back to the game. After bishop h6, bishop takes h6, Savchenko played knight takes d3. All right, rook takes d3 check. Ho-hum, just an exchange sacrifice here, no big deal. Rook to d1 check. And here he plays king e2. If king e4, then it looks like this is should be mating. So f3, king f5, okay, g4, king e5 has to happen sooner or later. And then, actually, let me think about this for a moment. What is the best way to finish the job here? So if f4, then we're cutting off the bishop's help. So f4, king e4, knight c3, the king can come to f3 or e3. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Maybe knight to b2. So that protects the pawn and threatens knight to d3, but that's not entirely convincing either, or it's not the clearest. So let me think about this for one more moment. All right, probably just knight to c3. Okay, that looks simpler. Knight c3, then the king has to go to f5 or e5, but yeah, I'd rather have the knight covering that square. Right, so here, f4 check, king f5, and now h3, and we're threatening g4 mate, and I don't see a good answer, or any answer, other than queen f4. Okay, so that looks like that should do the job. And if king f5 here, then again perhaps h3 looks pretty effective. So I think that will do it. All right, so let us go back to this point. So in the game, black played king to e2, and here white has to be very, very accurate. Still, he's only got one move, I think, to stay alive and to win. So that move is d6, protecting the pawn on c4 and gaining a tempo too, because of the threat to black's queen. So queen d7, I think, was the best rejoinder. Here, perhaps bishop to g5 would have been a calmer and easier way to win, but what Boruchovsky found was perfectly good too. So knight to c3 check, king f2, knight e4 check, king g2. Now, I don't know, maybe if you have a supercomputer it'll tell you something different, but at least a regular computer will still think that black is okay here. and it takes it quite a while to find wins. I mean, you have to really help it along. So here, white plays rook to d2 check, and now the crucial line, I think, is king to h3. And it's quite difficult, but white can force a win. Rook to d3 check, king g2, bishop f4, and now, all right, knight takes e4 is the main line. Geary doesn't mention this, but the computer really likes this for a long time. A nice line that Geary found is this: queen to e8, trapping the queen, so it's very logical, or almost trapping it. It can go to g7, and then queen f8 does finish it off. But rook to g3 check, king f1, and now really beautiful. Bishop to e3. If queen takes f7, knight c3, and there's no answer. Even if black wanted to give away, his entire kingdom, he can't stop rook to g1 mate next move. So very, very nice. I don't know if Boruchovsky saw that. If he did, then the guy's a budding genius. But it's a great line. Anyway, knight takes e4 is really kind of tough. White wins, but it's not easy. So he's got to start with queen to d5, attacking the knight and pinning it, crucially. So that way on queen f5 he's got rook to g3 check. So king takes h2, rook f3 check. And here as well, it's still kind of messy. So if king g2, then queen to d3 wins. So black probably has to give up the queen at this point. But he's got a rook, a bishop, a knight, and 2 pawns for the queen. A lot of stuff. But nevertheless, white can maneuver his heavy pieces around black's knight and bishop and get the job done. So queen to d1, rook h to c8, for example, queen e2 check, king h3, queen f1 check, king h2, and now d7 buys white enough time to remaneuver everything. So rook f8, rook h4 check, queen f4, rook h2. Of course, we don't have queen f2 mate because of the knight on e4, but rook to b2 check, and now black has no really adequate defense to the threat of queen h2, followed by queen to h1 mate. So that's the idea. So there is a win in this critical variation with king to h3. It's not easy, but it is there. In the game, Savchenko played king to f3, thinking to stay more towards the center, but this ultimately didn't do the job either. So white can win in a few ways. Knight takes f6 and d takes e7 are also winning, but they're a little less flashy. Boruchovsky played rook to f2 check. And now we should look at not only king takes e4 is played in the game, but also king g4. So on this, white takes and takes here. And all right, the threat is queen g5 and queen g3 mate, so it's not really surprising that white wins, but still it's kind of a little bit elegant here with the fancy stepping on the diagonal. So white checks here, and now switches to a light square. King h3, queen f1, and then queen to f4. And now whichever way the king goes, he gets mated. So over there, or down here. All right. So back to the game. Instead of king to g4, Savchenko took. He's up a rook, knight, and a pawn. But, and also white's queen is for the moment stuck out of play, but not for long. Boruchovsky took on f6, and the threat is to play queen to d5 mate. So black has 2 reasonable ways of stopping this. And of course, e takes f6 is not one of them. This doesn't stop the threat at all. Queen d5 is checkmate. So black played e6 in the game, but let's take a quick look at queen c6 first. So queen c6, rook f4 check. Now if the king comes up, then rook f3, queen f4, and bishop to g7 wins the queen and will win much more besides. So king e5, queen e7 check, bishop e6, queen f6 check, d4 check, and black loses here. If he plays king to c5, then queen e5 check. Okay, if king to d2, then bishop to d2 check, and if king b6, then bishop to e3. And this battery is devastating. It's not just that it's winning the queen, it's forcing mate. For instance, king a7, rook to d7 check, queen to b6, takes, queen c7, and queen takes b7 as mate. Okay, if instead of king to c5, black goes straight back to c7, again, white has a little finesse to knock black out here. So queen to e5 check. Okay, if king to b6, Then there's rook to d6 and probably even better bishop to e3. While on king c8, white finally is the one who enjoys the material advantage. White's up a rook, and black has no real chances. Note, too, that white threatens queen to d8 mate. Okay, so finally we get back to the game here, and Savchenko played e6, which is very logical. So he's trying to keep the queen stuck in the box there, but she gets out. Rook to f4 check. If king to e5, then bishop g7 check, and rook to d4 check. And white is winning here. Queen f3. And here's one more funny line here. If king to c7, then bishop e5 check, and white picks up the rook for nothing. See, right now, black is doing okay on material. He's got 2 rooks and 2 pawns for the queen. But it's not going to work out for him. So king c5, bishop takes, rook takes, and again, materially, black is okay. You know, if he could just consolidate, it would still be a game. But after queen e3 check, black has a funny choice. He can avoid losing the rook if he steps very carefully. The only problem is that this careful stepping is going to walk into a mate. So, okay, if king to c6, this is easy. Queen e4 check, and wherever black goes, white wins the wins the rook, excuse me, either with queen to d4 check or queen to e5 check, depending on where black goes. So king to b4, and if king takes c4, queen e4 check, and then queen e5 check wins the rook. So king to b4, queen to e1 check. All right. If the king goes to c5, queen e5 check wins the rook. If king a3, queen c3 wins the rook. If king c4, again, queen e4 check, and then queen e5 check wins the rook. So king a4. All right, very good. Well, now white can play queen to d1 check, but even better is a3, threatening queen to b4 mate. And if a5, for instance, then king to b2. And now what does black do? He's got no defense to the threat of queen to d1 mate. All right, so that's what could have happened on king to e5. In the game, Savchenko's king just kept mushing forward. King to d3. All right, rook to f3 check, and now the white queen is ready to come back into the game. Well, black tried king to d4, hoping that maybe queen f4 check, king c5 might give him a chance to escape, but instead, Boruchovsky played bishop to e3 check, and black gave up. One sample variation. If king takes c4, queen f4 check, king b5, queen e5 check. Okay, if the king ever goes back to c6, queen c5 is mate. And if king to c4, then queen c5 check, king d3, queen c2 is mate. So a fantastic game by this young guy, Avital Boruchovsky. Beautiful attack. I mean, just crushed his opponent and attacked with tremendous imagination. Now, we don't know that he saw all of those really amazing lines that were in the side variations. I mean, if he saw all of that, then we can just about crown this guy a future world champion. But still, it was a really well played game, beautiful attack, and it shows. If you play this line, you play lines like this Larsen variation, you're really playing with fire. All right, it doesn't mean you're going to lose, but things like this can happen to you. And even though Boris Savchenko is a very strong grandmaster, you see, I mean, he really got his head handed to him in this game. All right, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Next time, I think I'll probably get back to the Rui series, but I still wanted another break here, and I hope you guys thought that it was worthwhile. So I'll see you guys later. Don't forget to check out my blog, thechessmind.net. Hope you'll like it, and I'll see you then, or see you next week. Bye-bye.